All right, good morning, everybody. It's Chat with Francesca, and today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to Laura Garofalo, and she is an employment attorney, and her superpower is helping people or entrepreneurs with fair and respectful workplaces. So, welcome, Laura, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Francesca. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into the business that you're in right now?
Sure. So I've been practicing employment law for 16 years, and I've always worked with companies. And that started because actually law is my second career. I started out in human resources. And so I have a soft spot for human resources professionals and all the issues that they face. And after working in HR for a few years, I decided it was time for me to become the expert and to help out HR professionals. And I first started out at one of the large law firms in Chicago, one of the country's largest law firms, and I was there for many years. And I decided after a while that what I really loved about my job was pushing me more toward an in-house position. And so at that time, I decided to transition to an in-house position with a Fortune 500 company. I was vice president, senior employment counsel there. And after about 7 years, I transitioned out and I decided to open my own practice and focus on helping small to mid-sized companies who would not otherwise be able to afford someone with my level of knowledge at one of the bigger firms.
That's awesome. And it's so rewarding to be able to serve other companies
It
and
really
help people.
is. It, it,
Yeah.
it really is. I live in a community of small businesses, and as we've all seen the past year and a half, it's so important to help them thrive because they're really the cornerstone of our economy. And being able to help them has truly been rewarding.
Well, I think too just the COVID issues right now that they're facing, you need that guidance. Absolutely need that guidance.
Yes, that's an understatement. Yes.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about when you go into a company, what are the things that you help them to do a fair and respectful workplace? What does that look like?
So when I'm talking with employers, I talk to them about a myriad of issues, anything that has to do with the employer-employee relationship. And it's very easy to say, well, the law says this. So yes, you can do it. No, you can't do it. But I look at it from a more holistic approach. And I look at it more as, first of all, what type of culture do you want your company to have? Or what culture do you have that you want to keep? And what values do you have for your company? And I really want to look toward those values in guiding employers and have them consider those values when making their business decisions. Because just because a company can legally do something doesn't necessarily mean that it should. And when companies are treating their employees fairly, when an employee feels that they're being treated fairly, respectfully, when they feel like they have a voice and they're being heard, those are not the types of employees that usually are filing those complaints or those lawsuits. And they're not the employees who are seeking union representation. And so, if we can have an eye toward a holistic approach and what type of culture do we want, it helps with business operations as well.
So sometimes when you go into a client and they tell you that this is their culture, these are their values, but then you start to dig deeper, do you ever find that maybe they're misaligned, that those aren't the culture, that isn't the culture and values that they're really spreading throughout the
Oh, sure.
organization?
Oh, sure. And sometimes the company may not realize it. Certain levels may not realize it, but absolutely. And that's why it's so important to do things like workplace trainings, having meetings with employees, regular meetings with employees, one on one in team settings. One thing that I do recommend to companies if they find that there is a disconnect between employees and managers, have an avenue for employees to give anonymous feedback on their managers. I don't know any employee who would feel comfortable giving negative feedback on a manager if it was not anonymous. But that's another way to help keep people's behavior more on the radar, to understand truly what might be some issues that are going on, and so that the company can make some decisions about that.
And I think sometimes too, And it's not always just negative feedback, but being able to provide feedback, because someone may not realize that they're doing something that upsets somebody else, or if they had chosen a different word or a different posture. And I think all those things are part of that feedback.
That's so true. A lot of times I hear, well, gosh, I didn't mean to offend someone. I didn't intend it to come across that way. And we've heard leaders say that, right? We've heard many people say, well, not my fault. I didn't intend to. But really, when companies are drafting their policies and they're looking to see how they want their workplaces to be, and even the law doesn't care about what intention is, right? What it cares about is what was the impact that your words and actions had on others. And so if we are conscious of that, then that can help us make better decisions.
That's a very, very good point, what you just said. Can you just repeat that? Do you remember what you just said about the impact?
Sure.
So the law says it's not the
correct. So the laws of harassment discrimination do not care about intent. What it cares about is what was the impact that your words and actions had on others. So if I use a racial slur, but I don't mean to offend you, it doesn't matter. If it's still offensive, it's still, potentially harassing. That's what matters. What was the impact on the person who heard it? Not my intention.
And I think it goes, I can remember an instance where I was doing some customer service with somebody, helping them in a business. And I realized that what basically happened is we were trying to help this person. And when I use this as a training afterwards, we were in a conference room and we had backed this person into a corner. So they were in the corner and all of us that were trying to help her were like surrounding her. And after we walked away from that, I thought about it and I said, she didn't have a way to get out of that room because we had backed her into the corner. Now she was fine, but that really hit home with me that our actions may not have been correct because they were backed into a corner and there was no way to escape. So there was nobody intended that to happen. It just happened.
Right. And along those same lines, what we all need to keep in mind is people have different boundaries and people have different values. And, the golden rule that a lot of us were raised on, that's no longer appropriate for today's workplace. Because people have different boundaries and different values, we shouldn't be treating them how we want to be treated. What we should be doing is what's now called the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated. And so we have to make sure that we understand other people's boundaries and values. And that means we have to have discussions.
That's an awesome thing, the platinum room. I hadn't heard that before. And that is, so I'm a hugger and I'm a toucher. So for me, I've had to learn I can't do that. So I ask permission and I'll ask somebody, are you a hugger? Are you not a hugger? And I'll watch that space because you can see when you're in someone's space.
Yeah. And so, I've talked with a number of managers who say I'm a hugger and no one's ever said anything to me. Well, a couple issues there. First of all, as the manager, you have the power over your subordinates, right? There's a power differential there. And so they may not be comfortable saying, hey, I'm not wanting to be touched. And so what I usually challenge managers just to do is, go 1 week without hugging someone and see if anyone asks for a hug. And if no one asks for a hug, that tells you something. Now with COVID, that's gonna be a little different, right? But once we're back in the workplace.
Well, I will tell you, after we were out of the first round of COVID and I would meet people in person, they would just look at me and say, okay, I've been locked up for a year. I have to hug you.
I have to admit, the first time I went out after the pandemic, this was, a year and a half after it first started. I went to an outdoor mall and it was so overwhelming to see people. I just turned to this woman and I said, I have no idea who you are, but I feel like I want to give you a hug. And she was there with her grandchild and she just gave me this huge bear hug. And it was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing. But again, not everyone wants to be hugged. So we have to be conscious of that.
Well, and it's not even a hug. I mean, sometimes you may go in and touch somebody's shoulder and they don't want to be touched.
That's right. Or it's getting too close to someone's personal space. It can be even things like, personal endearments, calling someone babe, honey. I had that happen to me at a workplace once where a woman who was my colleague would always call me honey. And it felt very demeaning. It felt like she was treating me more like her child. But then I noticed she called everybody honey. She called, even her boss honey. And so it's just a matter of bringing it to her attention, saying, hey, why don't you just call me Laura? Because again, she didn't intend to make me feel any certain way, but she wasn't aware of my values and my personal boundaries.
And I think that too is something that changes, whether it's age, whether it's where you are in the hierarchy. But I would always call people sweetheart or whatever, again, when I was younger. And then I got to a point where, well, maybe that isn't right. Right. So I changed the behavior. But it's interesting now that I've gotten older, and I watch that and I see that behavior and I'm like, wow, I'm not so sure that was the right way to handle that, or that term of endearment. And you see it right through all the politicians now, right? All the things that are going on. And it really just brings it to the forefront that maybe this isn't the right way to be doing things.
Yeah. And one thing I would suggest to folks who say, well, that's just who I am. Okay, are you just that way with females, or are you that way with everybody? And that's one way to check your behavior as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I have taken notice of the different things that I personally do, and brought that in to make those changes as well, just because sometimes somebody will say something to you and it just catches you the wrong way. And then I think, well, boy, I may have said those things, and how did those people feel when they said it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what type of, do you do any other trainings or recommendations? I know that you've talked about some tools, but
yeah, so I do a variety of workplace trainings. I do that for through another company called Fair Measures, a wide variety of trainings, whether it's respectful workplace, training managers how to manage within the law, conducting one-on-one sensitivity trainings for someone who may need some extra special attention, but the company isn't ready to let them go. We also do trainings on effective communication and just straight up harassment training as well.
And harassment training that's required yearly?
So about a half a dozen states require harassment training, including Illinois. And yes, in Illinois, it is required. Every employer has to give it to every employee every year. Yes.
And is there a documentation process for that in terms of what the employer has to have? Do you have to have a certificate that they attended a class? How does that work?
Yeah, so I strongly recommend having some sort of sign-in sheet or some sort of recorded documentation, because otherwise, if an audit's done, you have no way to prove that your employees took the training.
And a lot of the payroll companies are doing those trainings that you can sign on and do it. Some of them even have tests.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's very easy for employers to get that training in. And for the smaller employers who really have a tight budget, actually the state has a model training that employers can use. It depends on really what the employer is looking for. Are they looking just for a check the box exercise, which I don't recommend, because there's a lot of value in doing these trainings. That's the whole purpose of them. Or does the company want something that's more tailored to the company, to any potential or actual issues the company is facing that it wants to address, a review of company specific policies? So it's really what the company's looking for.
And I think with the younger generation, they just don't have any idea about this. So I've worked with some clients who the younger people in the company said, I had no idea these were even topics or issues. So it really is a great program to have out there.
Yeah. And, when a company has strong policies that are communicated to employees and that are enforced in conjunction with training, that's when they really start creating that culture that they want, that respectful workplace that they want. Because the goal is to prevent inappropriate behavior before it starts. First of all, that's how we keep morale up. That's how we keep productivity up. But it's also how the company keeps costs down, because if a litigation is filed, even if the company wins, lawsuits are really expensive. Lawyers are not cheap. And so the goal is to get to the point where there aren't complaints that are being filed with agencies or lawsuits that are being filed in court.
All right, so I'm going to change topics just a little bit, and let's talk about, because this is a hot spot for me as well in my business. But talk a little bit about the difference between that W-2 and that 1099.
That is, aside from COVID and mandatory vaccinations and return to work, that's probably the most that I've talked about in the past several months, and that's been a hot topic for years, but especially now. And I think it's only going to get closer scrutiny because, as we know, in the past year and a half, independent contractors, at least here in Illinois, were able to apply for unemployment for the first time. And now the state has a database of all these people who said they're independent contractors. And if and when they get the resources, they can go look into that and say, hey, were these people actually classified accurately? And it is so important to classify workers correctly. A lot of companies want to have independent contractors. They want the 1099. It's easier, right? It can be cheaper. It can be because they feel, well, I don't have full-time work, so I might as well just make the person a contractor. Or sometimes the individual asks to be a contractor. And unfortunately, none of that's good enough. That's not how it works. There are different tests. And what makes it even trickier is the IRS has one test. The Department of Labor has one test, which is different. And then certain states have their own tests. And so a worker could be considered an independent contractor under one test, but not under the others. And so it can be very challenging. But it's so important to get right because there can be excruciatingly high penalties if it's done wrong. The person who makes the decision and got it wrong might be personally liable. There could be jail time. It's so important. And then if it turns out this person was supposed to really be an employee, there's back wages, potentially overtime, back benefits. So it's really important to get it right.
So, and those are unbelievable points and very, very true. And the test that you have to go through, I think on the IRS is like 10 questions and there's no right or wrong answer.
It's really, there's no one thing that says, okay, yes, you're an employment or you're an employee, or yes, you're an independent contractor. It's really a balancing test. But generally the things to look out for, some big red flags. And this is the one that really gets some employers. If the worker is performing work that is the type of work that your company does, that is a huge red flag that this should be an employee. So if you're, the gig economy, that's getting so much attention because companies are saying, oh, I'm a small graphic design company and all of a sudden I'm getting an influx of work. I don't want to hire on employees, so I'm just going to hire on some contractors to do the exact same work that the other couple of employees are doing. And that's going to be problematic. So that's one of the biggest red flags to look out for. If the person's performing that same work, if you are training that person, if you are giving that person a computer or a phone, if you're giving that person maybe time off or paying expenses, these are all big red flags that person is really an employee. And if you're contracting with that person individually instead of through a business entity, another red flag.
Huge red flag on that one. So I'm just going to touch base on this just a little bit because I just want to make sure that people are aware of this. But right now, because of the unemployment situation and what people are going through, what I'm hearing from small businesses is they're not able to hire team members because the people that are coming in are asking to be paid in cash so that they can maintain their unemployment benefits. And the good news is these folks are saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And they're suffering because they can't hire people. But that too is a huge problem.
That's very troubling. That's fraud. And both the worker and if the employer were to do that, could be in a whole lot of hot water. So it's good to hear that those you're talking to are declining.
Yeah. So again, just because of the economy and where we are today, and with COVID, these are real issues that the small business owners are filing. So
I understand that. One thing I do want to say to make clear to folks is I understand it and I feel your pain, but if you're going to do it wrong, if you're going to do it not in a legal manner, it's going to cost you a whole lot more on the back end. So don't do it.
Yeah. No. Great advice. So I do want to touch base on this issue because I think I've got two more questions. So one is properly classifying employees. And I will tell you that I have a good understanding of this, but I will not make those decisions. I will always refer people to an attorney. So do you want to talk a little bit about that classification issue?
In terms of
exempt and non-exempt?
Oh, exempt versus non-exempt. Yeah.
You could talk about this for hours, I know.
I could. Number one thing I always tell employers is just because someone is paid on a salary basis does not make that person exempt from overtime. It's not hourly versus salary. That's not it. In order to be it, the way the law works is everyone is presumed to be eligible for overtime unless you can prove that they are exempt. And in order to be exempt, they have to be paid on a salary basis. They have to be paid a certain amount per week, which comes out to being just under, it's right around $35,600 a year. And they have to be performing duties that meets one of the duties tests in general. And it has nothing to do with what your title is. If you are called VP of operations, but you are the person answering phone calls and scheduling meetings and deciding what supplies to purchase for the company, you're not going to reach those duty tests. And it does not matter what your title is. So it's imperatively important that if you think someone is exempt, to speak with an attorney about that.
And even if somebody is a manager, supervising someone does not automatically mean they're a salaried person.
No, it depends. Again, it's going to depend on what their actual day-to-day duties are. So what's the majority of your day? Is the majority of your day doing administrative things? Or, and maybe once or twice you answer a question for your employee, or once a year you do a review? Or are you primarily making, decisions that have a significant impact on the business? So it is a case by case. Just because you have two employees with the same title does not necessarily mean that they are both the same exemption status.
And if you don't pay them correctly, again, it's a huge issue, right?
It is. It's penalties. It's interest. It's not a good situation to be in. There are a couple cases just recently. There was one out of Pittsburgh recently, and a company had to pay workers a total of $400,000 in back wages to workers who were first of all, they were misclassified as independent contractors, but also they weren't paid overtime. So part of the problem was they were misclassified as independent contractors, but they should have been employees and they should have been non-exempt employees. So $400,000 because it wasn't done right. We're not talking about, chump change here.
So sometimes the small businesses will say, well, I'll save money if I put them on salary. And that should not be the motive to put somebody on salary.
I would challenge them to find out why they think they're saving money.
Exactly.
Because if the goal is to get out of paying overtime and the person is working overtime, you're not going to save money once they find out they should be paid differently. Yep. It's actually going to cost them more in the long run.
Yeah, there was an issue once that a person was a 1099 contractor they were an employee and they thought they would save money by making them a 1099 employer or a 1099 contractor by not paying all the payroll taxes on that. And then they laid the person off. I think you and I talked about this once before. And so then the person went as a 1099 and filed for unemployment. And when unemployment figured out what had happened, I mean, it was a huge problem then for the employer because they were not a 1099 employee, and it just opened up. And it was because they innocently went and applied for unemployment.
Exactly, because I get that question quite often. Well, what's really the risk? What are the odds I'm going to get caught? I can't answer that, but what I can say is usually it's not malicious. So usually it's someone's talking, maybe at Thanksgiving, and someone there's a lawyer, they're at a party and someone's a lawyer or an HR. They say, well, that doesn't sound right. Or it's innocent like that. Their contract's up, they don't realize they're not eligible for unemployment, they go file, and then all of a sudden the employer now has an audit of everyone in that job title.
Yeah.
And it's not a situation the employer wants to be in.
Yeah. So I can only stress to attorneys are expensive, but they're expensive for a reason. And again, I say that you're expensive, but you're not expensive because at the end of the day, you're going to save that company all of this money by doing the right things.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I focus on the proactive steps. I no longer handle litigation. I want to be on the proactive side. What can we do to make sure that we don't get into this position? Or if you do get into the position, you can get rid of it hopefully fairly quickly and fairly inexpensively. So let's make sure we're doing all the right things up front. And it is far less expensive to put in that investment. And not only that, not only is it less expensive from cost out of pocket for legal expenses, but you're doing the right thing. Employees are going to see that. You're going to notice when you do the right thing, you're going to have higher employee morale. You'll have potentially less turnover costs. When employees are happy, they feel like everyone's being treated fairly, then they're more productive. They're not worrying about what's the company doing? Am I being mistreated? They're more productive. And so it's just a win-win on both sides.
All right. So we're at the half an hour, but can I ask you one more question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So with COVID, and I was a big proponent of allowing people to work from home because I thought that that would make a happier employee. They could do family things. They wouldn't have the travel time, et cetera. So one, if you would talk a little bit about the remote employee, but then, so now we have, and I don't know what it's called. I don't know if it's called ghosting of positions, but now we have employees that, you know what, I'm working remotely, so I don't have to live in Illinois anymore. I'm moving my family to Florida, but I didn't tell my employer that I moved.
Well, that's problematic for a number of reasons. One of which is, and you know more about this than I do, that businesses have to potentially have licenses to operate in other states. It's going to open tax issues. So employees really
Workers' comp.
They should be talking to their employers before they move states. That's for sure.
Exactly. So talk a little bit about the remote employees and what you're seeing in the workplace in terms of, that respectful workplace and how you've either helped or ideas that you have for.
Sure. So it's really important that we keep our remote employees engaged, whether it's a fully remote workforce or partially remote workforce. And so we want to make sure also that we remind remote workers of the expectations. So whether that's work hours, maybe the person doesn't have to be tushy and seat from 9 to 5, but here are some core hours I need you to be available. Otherwise, you can work at your own discretion as long as you get the work done. So just be very clear with expectations up front, because it's really not fair to employees if there are expectations out there and they're not aware of them. And it just makes things run more smoothly. Want to remind those employees that all company policies still apply, even if you're remote. So that means harassment, whether it's over email or a chat or whatever, still apply. Confidentiality, all the company's policies still apply. It's really important that managers and really the company in general maintains regular and constant feedback and interaction with those employees as well. So setting up weekly team meetings via Zoom and requiring everyone to be on video, setting up weekly one-on-ones with employees, asking them, how are you doing? Is there anything you need from me? Some people are taking the remote work really hard, from a stress or a mental aspect, or they might need some sort of accommodation that the company's not aware of, or even just something easy, an adjustment. Say, hey, I have to take my kids to school from 8:30 to 9. So is it okay if I start my workday at 9:15? So it's really important. Just keep the lines of communication open and try to keep colleagues, coworkers involved with each other, whether that's setting up maybe virtual lunches for the team so they can stay connected, setting up a team, instant message Slack if the company, instant message chat if it's Slack or whatever they have, just so the team can keep in constant contact so people don't feel like they're off on their own. And then it's so incredibly important for those non-exempt employees that they are paid for all time that is worked. And especially important to put forth expectations to them. If there are rules about working overtime, such as you need to get prior approval, you need to let employees know that. Tell them, all right, you're expected to work these hours, no overtime unless you get prior approval, no such thing as off the clock work. If you check your email at 9 o'clock at night, you're accounting for that time. Incredibly important. And a question I get a lot from employers is, well, I told my employee that, but they worked overtime. They worked 5 hours of overtime that week, and so I'm not going to pay it. Well, unfortunately, you still have to pay it. Even if they work it without approval, you still have to pay that overtime, but you most certainly can discipline them if they are not following the company's policies.
Whether you're working remotely or in-house, that is
Yes.
a huge issue that employers do not understand.
Yes.
Yes. And that's a hard one. That's really tough, because then the person feels like they're being persecuted, because they're dedicated, but you have to fix that issue.
Yeah. And and again, it all goes back to the communication, and it's the approach, right? If we take the approach of the kind of culture we want to have as companies, we want to make sure that you have time for your mental health, that you have time for your family, for your other interests. We want you to have time for things outside of work. And it's all about how you proposition it, right? And instead of saying, look, you're going to get fired if you work overtime, you don't ask for it. We can have a different approach and align it with the company's values.
Right. No, that is absolutely huge. So in terms of people going back to the workplace, what I have seen from some companies is, because they saved money by people working from home, that they were gifting and giving their employees more things. So I think that's just something else, that if there's savings, you can certainly, like, somebody sent yoga mats and gave them some yoga training and some different things, and sent them some weights and different things. Again, going back to that, helping the culture, making sure that you're staying active. And they did that because they had extra money in the budget, because people were working from home.
Yeah. And little things like that go such a long way.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's going to be something for companies to think about going forward. Do we need to come back to the workplace full time? Do we want to come back to the workplace full time? And there are a whole host of factors to consider, right? The cost of the office, productivity, just the type of business, right? So those are all things that the company should be thinking about, because if the company is able to work remotely or partly remotely, it may want to, because it helps open potentially its applicant pool if it can do business in other states, and they can get talent from a wider area than if they were physically in the office. So lots of things to think about.
And I think onboarding team members in this environment too has probably been very difficult. But again, the things that you walk through, just important to make sure when you're onboarding those employees, to make sure that you're giving them that extra attention that all the employees deserve.
Sure. And that's why I think it's really important when having meetings, company meetings, do it with a video and make sure people's videos are on so that it can establish that connection. It's maybe not as effective as in person, but it's certainly more effective than over a phone call. And I know some people are tired of Zoom. And that's a discussion for another day, whether you need to have as many meetings as you do. But in terms of keeping a connection with employees who are remote, it is important to have that video and that connection that way.
All right, I'm just going to put this out there. I love doing the Zoom meetings. I don't have a problem
I
doing
do
it.
too. I thought I was in the minority, but I do too.
No, I know people are like, I'm zoomed out. I could never be zoomed out. I'm fine with doing Zooms. It's okay. So,
Yeah.
all right. So tell us how we get in touch with you, and then do you do like if a company wanted to reach out and talk to you, do they have like a way to be able to chat with you just to kind of understand what they might need from you, and then you can set up something?
Absolutely. So it's probably easiest so people don't have to write down too many things. All my contact information, my email, phone is on my website, which is www.lauragarofalolaw.com. And happy to talk with employers. What makes sense? Does it make sense to chat about what keeps you up at night? Does it make sense to do an audit of your policies, your practices? Or they're just specific issues, burning questions that need immediate attention?
And I would, so in the health world, right? So they finally now you do your yearly exam, right? You're supposed to go and get the checkup. And then now they've added in all the mental health issues, right? Are you having issues here or here? I honestly believe that if a small business does not have a relationship with someone like you, one, you should have it. And then two, have that touch point with you so that you make sure that everything is being addressed the way it needs to be addressed. And
No.
you should always have on your success team in any business an attorney, and better to build the relationship before you need them, right? So
I
if
agree.
somebody's in touch with you, now I've built this relationship, I know what you're about, and I can just pick up the phone and say, Laura, I got this going on. What am I supposed to do? Right? So
That's right. And also establishing that relationship, but also making it sure everything's going the way you'd like it to be going, making sure there are no red flags, because that will keep your costs and your time down in the future, hopefully.
yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a sounding board. I mean, just having these trusted advisors is so important for us running our businesses
Agree.
and having that relationship. All right, so we are going, thank you so much for doing this. This
Oh,
was
my
really a lot of fun.
pleasure. Thank you for
And
having me.
you are
I
more than
love
welcome.
talking with you, Francesca.
I know, it's great, right? So we'll go ahead. We're going to get this posted up on YouTube. We'll get some other stuff out on social media as well. We'll go ahead and put some information as well as how people get in touch with you. But I cannot stress the importance of on your success team, making sure that you're having all the boxes checked and build those relationships with people. And again, there are different attorneys do different things. Laura is specialized in employment law. So whether it's, and again, I would even say that you would even assist and help if employees needed help with something. I'm sure they could reach out to you as well. So you're not just one-sided.
Actually, I am. I am
Oh, you
just
are
one.
just
I
one-sided.
am. I work
Okay.
just with employers. Yes.
Okay.
That's something that I've done my entire career that way. I'm not building any precedent against employers, and I'm not creating any conflicts with clients that way.
Okay,
Yes.
that sounds very good. But there are other people. There are lots of
Oh,
different
sure.
attorneys that do lots of different things. So your
Yes.
specialty is just with the employer side and helping
Yes.
them to have that good relationship with the employee. So hopefully they're not
Yes.
calling you.
Because again, what I love to do is I love working either with HR professionals or management teams on the HR types of issues. And that's where I feel like I can bring the most values when I'm working with the company to try to create that better workplace.
Okay.
Because we've all worked in some toxic work environments. And it's when you're spending the majority of your day at work, it's not good if it's not a respectful place to be.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much and
Thank
have a
you.
great day, and be watching for this to come out.